Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. This week on the show, I'm joined by my right-hand man, Tony Peterson, to discuss his biggest wins, misses and mistakes, lessons learned, and book recommendations from the 2023 season. All right, welcome back to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by First Light and their Camo for Conservation initiative, which I've always been a big fan of because what it does is it sends a portion of all sales of First Light's whitetail camo gear to the National Deer Association. And I've always been a big fan of the National Deer Association, but I have some news related to the NDA, Tony. I'm now, I guess, extra biased towards us helping the NDA because I am now on the board of directors for the National Deer Association.
Nice.
Yeah. So hopefully going to be able to do some more good stuff for NDA between First Light's donations, and hopefully I can offer an idea or two, and we'll keep on keeping on when it comes to making sure the whitetails and whitetail hunting is good in this country, right?
That's cool, man.
Yeah. So that's exciting news. In other news, last week, Tony, I did something that I don't do often, which is a solo podcast. And you do it every week on Foundations, but I did a solo one last week in which I just went through the nerdy thing that I do and that my wife do here at home for our day-to-day life, which is every year we do this annual review where we talk through kind of all of our highlights from the last year, any possible lowlights. We kind of review our goals from last year and then start planning for 24 or planning for the next year. So we talk through, different goals, different ideas, trips, all that kind of stuff. So I did that last week on the show and kind of talk through how I do that, why I do that, and specifically how you could do that for your hunting season. And since you left me all by myself last week and didn't have to go through that process, I thought this week I should force you to do that a little bit today with me. Are you game for that?
So hold on. I'm being vilified for you going rogue. You can get a hold of me multiple ways, and you didn't try to get me on there. You decided it's your show. You're going to do it. And now I'm at fault somehow.
Yeah. So now you really are sounding like my wife.
Yeah. Well, it felt like we got married there. I was like, wow, that was a weird shot to take at me, Mark.
So regardless of that very legitimate feedback, are you game for the idea?
Sure, man.
Okay. First off, though, good Christmas break, good holiday vacation, all that stuff.
It was good. I've been, I talked to a bunch of my random buddies, and it feels like 3 full days of holiday stuff in a row is a lot.
Oh yeah.
Like I had a conversation with my wife last night where most of the Christmas stuff's obviously put away now, but I just noticed this one random thing and I was like, hey, can that go? Like, we don't need it anymore. And then we got into an argument about like Christmas spirit and, the typical married stuff. But I was like, I wouldn't probably have a tree or like if it were just up to me, Christmas would look a hell of a lot different than it does. Since I have a wife.
Are you really that Scroogey? You really wouldn't do a tree?
I would, if the girls wanted it. Yes, I would probably do it. But wow. I mean, I don't know if we've talked about this or not, but I feel like there are times I just walk through my house and, I'm sure it looks different if you're looking at this background here in my basement where I have a lot of deer heads and fishing rods and bow presses and all that crap. But like generally in my house, in the space that I spend most of the time, there's nothing that I bought and brought in there other than like maybe some furniture. I look at the walls and I'm like, I don't know where this painting came from or that thing or whatever. It's all my
nobody
wife's stuff.
Nobody would know that you lived there, right? Unless they went to the basement.
No way.
Yeah. Same here. Ditto. Yeah. But isn't that the bargain like we make? Like that's in exchange for them letting us go do crazy stuff all over the state and the country, do our thing. We grant full dominion of the home and the rest of the life, right?
I don't think we grant it, buddy. I think it's just taken from us.
That's a good point. We're lucky to get our little thing in.
I think it's like what's going on with space and the moon right now, where everybody's trying to get up there and claim these resources. And whoever gets there first and plants their flag wins. And I think we just get into a house and we're like, I don't know, I'll throw some Euro mounts up or whatever. Here's my books. And then all the other real estate starts to get claimed real fast.
It took all of 4 minutes and 54 seconds of your first podcast episode of 2024 for you to get a space reference in. That's good. That's real good.
And I'm not done yet, buddy.
Oh, man. Yeah. So I hear you. I hear you and all that stuff. I do like Christmas, but it does get to be a lot. This year was like a marathon for us too. We had 3 days of full Christmas stuff of family, and then friends, and then 2 additional days of my family coming to visit us, and then another friend thing. So it ended up being like almost 7 days straight. That's a lot.
That's enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But yeah, so you survived it. It was good. Do you do any kind of goal stuff or annual review stuff or anything like what I'm talking about here? Is that a part of your life at all?
I do some goals. I don't, do like a formal review of my year. I mean, partially because, what we do for a living, I mean, I'm creating content around what I did all year, so I'm kind of like reminded of the things that I'm like, man, that was really fun, or that kind of sucked or whatever. So it's like a soft way to review just through my professional life, and kind of helps guide me toward, what do I want to do this year with some of that stuff. But as far as like, what goals do I make? I don't make a lot of hunting goals, but I do make goals around like running or lifting, or like what I want to do that way. And it all kind of just blends together,
Yeah. What's the, like when you look back on 23 with those goals that you talked about, not necessarily hunting, but you're running and all that other kind of stuff, is there anything that you either really crushed or really failed on? Does anything stand out?
My goal for a couple of years has been 700 miles, to run 700 miles in the year, because that's just like a nice one for me, not to beat myself up, but it keeps me motivated. And what happened, I think it was in 2020, I tore a muscle in my calf. I was out photographing turkeys and just had a little tear in this muscle in my calf. Took me out of the game for a little bit, got back in it, whatever, no big deal. I retore that this year in Oklahoma, packing Steve's buck out. And it made it a real struggle to get back to that goal, because I had to take weeks off. And so that kind of stuff, if I have something like that happen where I'm like, this goal should be pretty easy, I didn't really need to take that goal that seriously. But as soon as little wrinkle in the plan comes up, and now you're like, okay, I don't know if I'm going to get there. Yeah. And so it kind of made me look at like, how am I going to ensure that I stay healthy enough and not do stuff like that to take myself out? So I increased. I'm shooting for 800 miles this year, just to give myself a little bit more. But also I'm looking at like my overall fitness and going, how do I avoid anything like that? Because every once in a while, I mean, you do this stuff long enough and whatever, like you're going to have something that happens that takes you out of the game somehow. I had that happen one time with my shoulder with bow hunting, where I thought it was going to take me out. It didn't, but it's a hell of a reminder, man. Like this is like, we're on thin ice sometimes with this stuff that we don't, like if you might never be forced to face it, but you might. And so I'm just looking at it that way. Like, how do I ensure that I can hit these goals and, keep up doing the things I want to do and go elk hunting and everything else.
Yeah. You take it for granted until all of a sudden it's not, the ability is not there, whether because of an injury or whatever. I had that, that wrist injury this summer. It was the first thing that's happened to me in a long time that took me out of being able to do the things I want to do. Couldn't shoot my bow, couldn't row the boat, couldn't, do some of those things that usually I just be like off doing all the time. And so for the first time this year, and I guess coming into the new year, I'm having like, I I'm coming to grips with not my mortality, but just like, hey, stuff's changing. Like you're approaching like middle life where stuff can just not work the way it used to, or injury is more likely. Like unless you're really thinking about it and doing the kind of stuff you're talking about, like staying up on your fitness and all that kind of stuff, and staying flexible or whatever the thing is you're worried about messing up. You kind of have to work for it. You can't just assume it's all just going to do it like it did back when you were 20.
Yep.
So yeah, like a lot of my fitness related goals now are just to keep me in the game. Like I want to be able to go backpacking with my kids and rafting and fishing and shooting my bow and all that kind of stuff without constantly fearing about, well, am I going to tear my calf or tear my whatever or roll my ankle or whatever it is. So with that 800 miles a year, what's that? I'm not good at math in my head. What's that factor out to a weekly average?
Well, weekly, I don't know, 40 miles a week or something. Well, actually, probably
Dude,
30. No, not 40 miles a week. That's way too much. I don't know. I'm really, really bad at math.
what
I
do you
just,
usually run? Like, what are your, what I'm getting at is like,
well,
how much are you actually
I,
running a week now?
so right now, the first week of January, I ran 21 miles,
Okay.
but I use a running app, and I know from my trends, cause I've probably done this for like 8 years now. I'll do a lot of miles in the winter. I'll do not so many miles in turkey season. I'll do a lot of miles in the summer, and then in the fall it really tapers off. So I
Yeah.
always try to shoot for a big January, a big February, a big March, because I know how this is going to pace out, and then in the summer I just like running outside a lot, and so I know I'll kick it back up in June, July, and August. So I don't go like I have to do this week. When I was doing 1,000 miles a year, it was like I think it was almost 3 miles a day that you have to do 2.87 or something. I don't remember exactly. And so I was like almost too aware of that. Like I
Yeah.
would think about it all. And then if you go on vacation or you go on a hunt, you're like, I haven't ran in 8 days. And then you do the math and you're like, okay, now I'm 25
That's a lot
miles
of catching
behind
up.
or whatever.
Yeah.
It's rough. And so I don't break it down by the week, but I'm real aware of how my progress is going for the month.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you're doing that with your mileage goal, and the way I'm trying to achieve my running goal is by putting a big stick, in my future. That being a race that I've got to make sure that I'm ready for. Um, I haven't gone the weekly or yearly kind of tally, but this year I think I haven't told my wife this yet. Um, but I think I'm going to try to run a marathon this year, and the thing keeping me from doing that to this point has been the fact that I don't want my training to take any more time away from the family than my half marathon training has. Um, but I'm thinking like I'm trying to figure out if I can figure out a way to be ready for a race like this. I just want to finish without getting injured. I'm not trying to like do it fast, but if I can do that in a way that's not significantly different than the amount of running I was doing leading up to this, I think I want to try to do that. So that's my big fitness goal for
Let,
24.
let me ask you this. How do you figure that you're going to be able to do a marathon with roughly the same amount of training as a half marathon?
Well, I'm just not going to like there's certain training plans where I guess I'm going to train lightly for it. I'm not going to like go by the book, but it seems like from some of the talking I've done, like I don't need to train to crush a marathon, right? Where I'm doing
Yeah.
like 20-mile runs all the time or 25-mile runs all the time. I can make sure that I'm doing the occasional extra long training run. So making sure I can do my 16 miles or 18 miles a few times. So there'll be a few days, over the course of a few months where I'm gone 3 hours instead of two. But not so much that the family notices is basically what I'm getting at. So there'll be a
Well,
few more long runs, but not so much that I'm an absentee parent any more than I was before.
right. Are you, what's the longest run you've ever done? Is it a
Uh,
half?
this is the half, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I
me
mean, it's
too.
a dramatic bump up.
I,
Um,
man, more power to you. I kind of toyed with that idea for a while, but if when you run 13 miles, I'm like, or 13.1 miles, I'm like, the idea of doing that again.
Twice.
Oh yeah, like
Yeah.
no.
See, my thing with it is, and this is kind of, I think, one of the, maybe a thing that's helped me from a hunting perspective too, is that I can do almost anything for a long time at like a moderate pace. Like I could hike forever. I think that I can run forever. Not forever, but I think I can run. I think I can just go. And
Yeah.
I'm just determined enough. Like as long as I'm not like trying to beat some kind of pace or race someone like individually, I can hike all day. We do like
Yeah.
big hikes and stuff. That's something I've done before. I've hiked 20 miles or something like that in a day. So I can do like a heavy loaded pack hike. Can't be that much easier than a no pack, very slow jog. Is my mental math I'm trying to convince myself of, at least.
Hey, it sounds
Um,
good. It sounds good, buddy.
yeah.
Have you on any of those runs? Did you ever that have that experience where you just chafed the crap out of your nipples?
I haven't had the chafing, so we'll see.
You haven't?
No,
Oh man.
no. So we'll see if that's something that pops up at mile 20 in a run. Well, it's TBD, but that's the thing I'm floating around in my head right now.
Because I'm just
Um,
envisioning you finishing the race with like the blood spots on the front of your chest and you
God,
know,
that would be bad. That would
yeah.
be bad. I
Yeah.
don't know. We're getting ahead of ourselves. I wanted to talk about 23 with you before we got to 24, but somehow here we are. Um, so, so like I said, last week I reviewed my 23 season, and we've talked about our 23 season more this past year than we did in the last like 3 or 4 years, which I think has been good because people enjoy getting to follow. I think it's useful for people to hear how we are trying to take the things we talk about every week on the podcast and actually put them into action, right? And so I was hoping we could better illustrate that this year, which I think we did. But looking back now, if you were to start a list, like a 2-column list here, on your left, you've got your big wins, and on your right side of the column, you've got misses or mistakes or, you know, low lights, whatever you want to call them. Name me a few things that would be on that list for you. Like what stands out as far as like the highlights or things you're most proud of, or the things you did really well this year. What's on that side of the column for you?
Um, I was real happy with the way I shot this year. You know, shot quite a few deer, and I felt really good about that. I also felt it just, we've talked about this. We talked about this a few times last year, but for the last couple of years, I haven't done a ton of public land hunting. I've had just a different couple falls because of the filming with MeatEater and everything. And last year, doing the Oklahoma thing, and then doing the North Dakota thing again, and kind of getting back into the swing of public land hunting. That was my most enjoyable stuff. And then doing the muzzleloader hunt here in Minnesota, just that for me, those were highlights, right? I mean, obviously hunting with my kids was really fun, and getting my daughter that decoy buck was really cool. Like I think about that a lot.
Yeah.
But personally, for my own hunting, where I'm like, okay, what's the arc of the next year look like? I want it to contain a lot more of the public land stuff. Where I'm like, I'm kind of feel like I slip back into that groove of having to scout right in the moment, get mobile, react, and just kind of, the things we talk about all the time, those are muscles you got to work. And I felt like I was missing something for myself. Like this drives my wife absolutely crazy, but I'm just like, I don't like doing the same stuff over and over again. Like I know that people are like, my dream is to have this land and build it up. And I get that 100%. But for me, I know what that would be for me. Like I wouldn't enjoy it as much as some people, because I don't want to go to the same box blind, or like, I don't want to get myself into a position where I'm like, I know if I stay out of there until Halloween and I go in there, it's probably over. Like I don't
Yeah.
want to, make a deal where I'm going to have good hunting, but I don't get to hunt as much, or I don't need to scout as much. And so
Yeah.
when I look at like the highlights from last year, the things that really meant something to me, just getting into that process again and trying to find deer on public land and dealing with that whole aspect, it just does something for me.
Is there anything that you think you got better at? Like, is there anything that you have known, like, hey, I've got to work on this, or this is an area of focus? and then you actually executed on it? Like, I know you did things that were more fun. You did the thing you like, but was there a thing that actually, like, a change you made or a shift in mindset or anything like that actually paid off?
Um, I think what I'm getting, what I think one of the things that happened to me last year that I actually like felt kind of tangibly was I'm getting just so much more confidence in calling my shots and being like, I'm going to do this, whether it works out or not. I feel like this is the best, and not second guessing myself. I mean, I
Yeah.
went through, and a lot of people do, right? Where you go through like, well, what if the conditions, or what if somebody came through here? What if I'm not set up right? And I'm kind
Yeah.
of
The what
like,
ifs.
yeah, I kind of feel myself getting to a point where if I if I feel like I'm putting in the effort to figure out a spot or figure out a location, I'm like, okay, here's my plan today. And if this doesn't work, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow. And if that doesn't work, this is what I'm going to do. And I feel like I'm just getting to a point where I'm just believing in that process more and being don't don't overthink it. Like if you're, the spidey senses are like, this is where he's going to be tonight or in the next 2 days. Figure this out and forget about those other options, forget about everything else. And then if it doesn't prove to be true, okay, that's fine. Move on. But I just kept finding like it kind of kept being true.
Yeah. That's a really good feeling when when the second guessing is not the loudest voice in your head. When you're
Yep.
instead sitting there like, hey, I feel confident in this thing and I have an idea and I have a plan B if that doesn't work out. I'm sure I'm not to the same point you are because you've got a decade on me, but I definitely can see like the change in that for myself over the last decade and just how much more confident I am out there and how much more comfortable I am with like, okay, this is what's in front of me. This is my plan and why I think this will work. And I feel very confident in why this is something that should work. But if not, I'll shift. I'll shift. But yeah, like that sense of, I don't want to say certainty because I don't think you're ever certain out there, but just confidence and like, and comfort maybe with what's happening and why you're doing it. That is a really reassuring feeling out there
Yeah.
versus 10, 15 years ago when I was out there like, should I be doing this or this or this or I don't know. um
Dude, it's important, man. And I think like on that line too, if you're like, this is this is where I think it's going to happen. Not how necessarily, but if you're like, I'm hunting this farm or I'm hunting this property, and you're like, the sign's pointing here, the conditions are pointing here, then you go, okay, I have that thing I believe in. And so now it's like, okay, if the conditions aren't right for it tonight, it's like I don't mind backing off and doing something else then. And it sort of gives you a little leeway with a lower confidence hunt. If like in your back pocket, you're like, okay, I'm when it breaks right, I'm going right there, and that's where I want to be the most. Then I don't like I notice this a lot on my public land hunts because I'll find a few places like that. But as well as I do, like fronts roll in, people walk in, trucks are parked there,
sure.
whatever. And if that's like all you're hanging your hat on, then it messes with you bad. Or
Yeah.
if you have a 4 or 5 day hunt, and you look at the forecast, like when we went to Oklahoma, it was 85 degrees when I got down there. And I'm like, I'm going to kill them on water. And a cold front came in, which happens to me all the time. And the entire plan changed. But I had run across some mast while scouting and some other stuff. And so it was like, even though that thing might not work, I found another thing that I feel just as good about. I just might have to tweak it a little bit or whatever. But you just like, when you get into that state, it's sort of like you don't have a bad sit. Because even if you go do a backup one because you're playing it safe or you couldn't get in there for some reason, you're like, I still have that and I'm still doing something at a certain level up to it. And I think that feeling of just going in there and being like, I believe in this enough for that, and then the backup enough for that, it's a game changer for you.
Yeah, I hear you in that. What about the flip side though? Like what's the thing? Is there anything still this year that gave you the feeling, that gave you like the that left a bad taste in my mouth, or a regret, or you left something on the field that you know looking back you could have done differently, you could have done better, or anything like that?
Yeah. So my Wisconsin hunting, I kind of take it for granted that I'm going to take my girls over there. It's going to be pretty easy. They'll kill a couple deer and then I'll do my thing. And my biggest regret from last year was, even though I knew the winter was rough, I was like, what I saw in the spring and the early summer over there, I was like, man, these deer came through really well. Heard from a forester who said they came through really well. And so my plan, I got lazy thinking there were enough deer there to work with. And then once we started hunting, even when I was running trail cameras over there and not seeing very many deer and not seeing the fawns that you should, I still in my head, I was like, this is not going to be a heavy lift this year. Like, you don't need to like devote a bunch of energy to scouting over here. Like, you kind of got this thing figured out. And then, my daughter killed a deer. My other one didn't, got into the rut. She finally killed one. And then it was my turn. And I felt like when I was hunting over there, even though I did kill a deer, I felt like I was way behind because I believed something that wasn't true, and it kept me from doing what I needed to do. And so when I actually got into the woods for myself, I was like, I knew it. I'm like, you're not working with nearly as many deer as you thought, and this is going to be just way tougher than you expected. And I lived through it. And I was like, that was so dumb. Like, you had all the evidence all year long that what you were believing going into spring wasn't true. And I chose to believe this fake thing because it made my life easier until I had to face the reality of hunting. And then it got a hell of a lot harder because that was what I was actually dealing with.
What could you have done differently though?
Scout. I just needed to scout more. I mean, I just took it for granted that I was going to have way more deer to work with. And so some of my old reliable stuff was going to work. And, I'm real confident during that time period, if you have multiple all day sits in a row, somebody's coming by, like if you have enough spots. And I did way more scouting after I killed my buck. Let me put it that way. Just because I was like, don't do this to yourself again. Like, this will be an easy trap to fall into. And so it was just a matter of just putting myself in more high odd spots more often that I didn't do.
What did you learn in that additional scouting, or did anything light up for you when you did do that post kill scouting?
Yeah, I did. I'm really starting to lean into this when I do this in the big woods a lot. If I shoot a deer and I still have some time to play around, because you know how it is, by the time you get to like your fifth or sixth shoot of the season, or it's 2.5 months into it, if you kill one when you're on the road, you're like, I just want to go home. I want to go see my kids. I'm sick of doing this. But I'm starting to go, if you have a day or two that you can play with, go walk. Get out there and just go look in the moment, see that sign. And dude, I ran cameras, I covered some ground, and I just looked for what I was missing. And what I found was I was missing a lot. And it was just dumb. It was just purely because I went into it thinking it was going to be easy and I wasn't going to have to figure out in the moment what I needed to do. But when you're dealing with a low deer density, it's all about finding just any deer first. Like, where's that little tiny concentration? And then how do you work off of it? And so after I killed that buck this year, I spent, almost 2 days just walking, and I found some stuff and ran some cameras, and I was like, okay, they were close, or there were good deer close that I was just missing because I was working off of old information. And it was just like a good reminder of how easy it is to just sort of be a little lazy and expect the rut's going to deliver to you. And it's never that easy.
Yeah. So coming in 24, do you have, is that it? Is that the thing that you want to work on more? Just like more and more scouting? Or is there anything else that you're thinking this season that's like on your to-do list as a big shift or a big focus, or an area like, hey, I gotta start working on this next thing? Like, what's that next focus point for you this year?
So a couple things I'm focusing on for this year. I'm definitely going to do probably 3 states for just public land. I want to do a new state that I haven't hunted. I'm kind of looking hard at Missouri because I've scouted it a few times, but I've never actually deer hunted down there. I want that part. I don't know what states exactly it'll be. I should draw Iowa this year, so one of them will be Iowa. That's going to be real important to me. My daughter who killed that decoy buck, has been talking a lot about doing that more. And so, and I killed my buck with a decoy this year over there too. And so I'm kind of like, I've never even hardly considered them a viable option for most of my deer hunting. I mean,
Right.
you know me, like I'm not a big caller. I'm not a big sense guy, whatever. But seeing the way that DSD doe worked twice last year and how fun it was, I'm like, is there more ways I can kind of build this in and have some fun with it and just try to like learn more? Because that's one of the things I love about turkey hunting. When you start to figure out the decoy game, especially if you bow hunt them a lot, it's like really a game changer for the entire experience. Like I know that sounds like duh, but it's big. Like a lot of people, especially a lot of people who only gun hunt them, don't quite get there, like to understand how important certain decoy setups and how you're going to do them throughout the season. And I just like, I feel like I'm kind of missing that with whitetails too. And it's this thing that I could involve into my world a little bit more. And so I'm kind of looking at that too.
Okay. So 3 new states, or not new states, but 1 new state, 3 public land hunts, more decoy. What's like what's like on your bucket list still that you haven't done, whitetail related? That's like the golden goose you're chasing, or maybe there's not a thing like that. But is there anything like you've been doing this a long time, Tony? You've done the public thing a long time. You don't really need to prove that to yourself anymore or anybody else. Um,
I do
so
though.
what are like I'm talking more overarching here. And maybe okay, so maybe that's the case, but like what's the next thing you're chasing? Like we always have like personal somethings that we're chasing. Do you have anything like that? Like is there like do you want to kill a giant or do you want to kill a X or a Y or every state that has public land? Is there anything like that that's like in the back of your mind ever?
The things that just eat away at me are always different environments. So the big woods thing is I'm like I have that sort of on pause since my daughter started hunting because that's most of my time over there is for them. And so it's like I kind of know I don't have enough time to do what I need to because even when I had more time, I couldn't get it done. And so I'm like, where I'm at now is it's sort of like just in a holding pattern for me, but that won't go away. Like killing a big one in the big woods on public land it's just always there. This thing I did with the muzzleloader hunt in western Minnesota and the cattails and that environment that I'm like I'm only familiar with it through pheasant hunting and a little bit of rabbit hunting and just like a very I've only spent 5 days of my life, well maybe 6 days of my life deer hunting that stuff. That's like under my skin because I see I told you this, we talked about this on the podcast, but the one day that I was down there with my muzzleloader and I followed those tracks and jumped all those deer in the
Mm-hmm.
cattails, those deer were as unkillable as they're going to be. And now you would think that's an open environment and that wouldn't be the case. But when you're in cattails, I'm 6'2", those cattails are way over my head. And I'm like, when you walk in there and they're bedded there before first light and you go, you jump them right there and you have a gun. And it's like, unless you had buckshot, that would be the only chance you might have there. And I go, how do you figure it? How do you solve for this? Like, how do you, and that's like the stuff that I love is like, it's not, it's fun to go back to some places you like, the Western River bottoms I love. And it's fun to do that kind of stuff. But when you get into an environment that says, you can't do this easily here, like,
Yeah.
trust me on this, they're here and you're not going to get them. That I love that. And so
Yeah.
I kind of look at it that way. Like I'm not like, I got to kill a 170 or something like that. It doesn't matter to me as much, but doing it right in these environments where I just walk in and I'm like, I don't have a strong basis here and I have limited time. And, there's a lot of hunters using this stuff. I love that.
Yeah. I can relate. I'd say that's where a lot of my interest is like the experiential aspect. Like, man, I want to kill one in this kind of way. I want to try to figure out this kind of place. I want to figure out this kind of adventure. And now, right now, like the thing I talked about this last week a little bit. I need like some new adventure in my hunting. Like I want to shift it up again. and I'm not 100% sure what that's going to look like yet, but I have some ideas, and just like
What's an example? Like, what's one thing you're thinking about?
um well, I'm going to hold off on the one I'm really really thinking about. But I don't like an example of one I have talked about in the past. That's probably not next year, but like a backpacking backcountry whitetail hunt, like that kind of thing, like something that's like truly different.
Yep.
Um, or like going in. I mean, yes, that kind of thing is the general idea I'm thinking of. Um, a rafting whitetail trip, something like that. That's just different than the usual. Get on, like, park the truck by the road, hike in, hunt for the afternoon, hike back out, go to your tent or go to your house or go wherever. I just think so much of, and I love that, right? I love my everyday deer hunting, but I also, like you, just want new, and I want to grow, and I want to try new things, and I want to see what's at the boundaries of this whole thing, and what else is out there. And one of the coolest things about whitetails, and some of my adventure seeking is outside of whitetails too, but a really cool thing about whitetails is they are almost everywhere in almost every different type of habitat, and you can hunt them in so many different ways. It's very easy to get like locked into the usual, which is like, well, we're gonna hunt them from a tree in the Midwest, in farm ground, right?
Yep.
It's especially for those of us that live in this area, it's very tempting to just get sucked into that basic template. And so I still want to do some of that, of course, but I want to continue to explore outside, color outside of those lines some. And so this year, one of my goals is to do that. Um, I've got one very very different idea, which we'll talk about at a later date. But in the meantime, I'm still thinking of like what a second option might be. So yeah, that's the kind of stuff that's on my mind right now. I do want to do, when it comes to this year. I want to. I got a question for you related to one of my ideas for a project this year, and it goes like this. You know the Working for Wildlife tour, right? You've heard me doing this whole thing last year, right? Traveling around, volunteering on public lands, doing various habitat projects, encouraging volunteers to come out. So we're going to do that again this year. But I want to figure out a way to tell that story through a film. And my idea is to do this, go do more projects, but find one of these projects where we can do a Working for Wildlife event, go out there, improve wildlife habitat, volunteer on public land, but then come back and do a hunt or a fishing trip or whatever. Come back and do a thing on that piece of ground, and showcase, like, you do the work and then you reap the rewards down the line. Like, that's possible. My worry though is, like, how do you do that without spot burning? Like, how do you do that without ruining the place? Because by doing a project like that, your people are going to be out there. Like, we're going to be talking about, hey, we're on this piece of public land. Or is there a way I can do that without talking about the place? I mean, this is something that you and I, and really anyone now with a social media account has to think about, which
Yeah.
is, we want to share what we're doing. We want to talk about what we're doing. We want to enjoy these places. But at the same time, you don't want to unnecessarily, you know, drive more people to a sensitive location that ends up making it worse for wildlife, worse for hunting, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you do that? Like, that's what I'm trying to figure out. I don't know how to do that, but I think there's got to be a way.
I think you would have to. I think the easiest way to do that, or maybe the most responsible way to do that, would be to find some category of project in a region, and planting trees or whatever it is, something like that, and then find a different property that had that 10 years ago or 20 years ago, or you know what I mean. It wasn't the same thing, but it was the same concept of,
Right.
Here is like a look into the future of it, instead of just going right back. But even then, people would figure it out. So I don't know. I don't know if I want to touch this one, because I feel like you're going to get yourself into trouble with the audience here, Mark.
Or what about this? What if the place where we go do the volunteer work, what if I do go back and hunt, but I shoot a Tony buck, I shoot a spike on day one, and it's so I shoot a deer, but it's not the kind of deer that's going to drive 1,000 people to go try and hunt there. Is
I
that
think
effective?
I think you should absolutely do that because I think you think that's going to be easy, and I want to see you do it. Just go shoot a quick little buck, Mark. No problem.
I'll follow the Tony methodology, and we'll report back here next year. I don't
Yeah.
know. That's one of my ideas, but I wanted to figure out a way to do it responsibly. But I think it's an idea that I want to get out there, which is the idea of giving back to the landscape more, right? Getting out there, doing this work, doing good things, and then it being a reminder, like, hey, you can also benefit from it. Like, you can go out there and you don't have to benefit from it. Do it just for the sake of doing it. But also, hey, like, it's pretty darn cool to get out here, and it's super satisfying to enjoy the fruits of your labor. I think anyone who owns private land knows that, right? You go out
Yep.
there, you do the work, planting your food plots or improving timber or whatever, and then you get to go out there and hunt and do your thing. Well, that's possible to some degree on public land too for folks.
For sure.
I mean, even if it's just you going out there solo and picking up trash. So
Dude,
yeah,
if anybody who's listening is down in Oklahoma and they want to do that, I recommend it. I've never been in a place that had more garbage in the woods.
really.
Yeah, just weird. I mean, some of it was floodplain stuff, you know, but a lot of it I was just like, and maybe it's just more. Part of it might be because then you get into a drier climate, stuff sticks around longer a lot of times. So maybe
Right.
that was part of it. But I was like, man, there's a lot of just trash here where
Yikes.
we're hunting specifically.
I hate that. I got to the point though with so we try to, like, when we're out hiking around doing whatever with the kids and stuff, we try to pick up things and, when you can, clean up. And we were on a hike over Christmas break, and we passed like what looked like dirty toilet paper, and my 3-year-old like ran to pick it up, and we're like, no, don't touch it, we can't pick that up. And he got so mad. He's like, no, we have to pick up the trash. You say we have to pick up the trash. We're like, no, that might be like
Yeah.
something really gross. Don't touch that.
Yeah. The same rules apply if you find like one glove in the woods. Just leave it.
Yeah. Anything like that, dangerous. Yeah, man. So any other big plans, thoughts for 24 other than the new state, the decoying, public land? You gonna go back to your buddy's lease anymore, or are you done with that?
I'm not sure.
Or not lease? I guess he owns it, right?
Well,
Your buddy's farm.
oh, I'm not sure. So I didn't hunt it this year. Um, I'm going to turkey hunt it. It's always there. I don't know. It's just, if I go down there to southwestern Wisconsin and I hunt that place, it's awesome. But I just want to be in the North Woods, man. I don't know how to describe it. My odds of killing a 140 on that southwestern place, or like at least a decent buck, are so high compared to, northern Wisconsin. But I just love the environment, man. So I don't know. I'm looking
Okay.
at, I mean, you know how this goes. This is definitely a dumb complaint, but when you do what we do, I'm always like, should I film in Minnesota or Wisconsin? Which, Minnesota is my home state, but Wisconsin, I just hunt a lot too. It's right there and whatever. And you know how it is when you're like, you don't save something for yourself, and it changes your entire season. And so I'm like, I don't I don't know what I'm going to do with Minnesota and Wisconsin this season as far as filming. And like you talking about, a backcountry hunt for whitetails or something. I've had this hunt in the back of my mind. I've got this Old Town kayak. It's a badass fishing kayak, but it'd be good for getting into a hunting spot too. And I have this chunk of public land in Minnesota that I think I could go in and kill a pretty good one on if I brought my bivy stuff and camped and paddled in there and did that kind of adventure type hunt. And I'm kind of like, should I do that this year? The downside is like, okay, I'm probably going to draw Iowa. Something else will come up for work,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I don't know if I want to hang my hat on that. But it's just like one of those things that you think about a lot, where you're like, I really just should just carve it out and say I'm just doing it just to do it, get it out of the way, because you know how it is. Like some of this stuff you start thinking about, and you're like, I've been thinking about doing this for 10 years and
Yeah.
haven't. It's like, come on, man, just do it.
Yeah. And then you blink and it's like you're however old, and you've been saying you want to do it someday forever, and now all of a sudden you're like, well, can I do it anymore?
Yep. Well, do
I
you
don't want
want
that kind of
to?
thing happening.
And I mean,
Right.
that's, something that I thought of when you were talking about like just 24 goals and just, setting maybe the marathon goal, that kind of stuff. I had a conversation with Eddie Claypool, who's a phenomenal hunter, several years ago. And he told me, because he was one of those guys who got after it so hard. Like Western game, whitetail, turkeys. I mean, I would have conversations with Eddie Claypool, and I'd be going to Nebraska to turkey hunt. And he'd be like, "Oh, where are you going?" And I'd be, like, we trust each other. We're friends. So I'd be like, "Oh, I'm this WMA and this W." And he'd be like, "Yeah, just walk in here. And usually the birds are back in this corner." And I'm like, I could not bring up a place. And he doesn't live there. He lives in Oklahoma. But I could not bring up a place where he wasn't like, "Yeah, I've been in there, or I killed a deer here or whatever." But he told me, and this was several years ago, but he's like, "Believe me when I say this, you will lose the drive eventually. Like, figure out a way to keep yourself motivated, to get out there, to keep doing it, because as you get older and you do more stuff and, family wears on you and you get tired and, the usual stuff." He's like, "You don't think it'll happen, but it will." And I've thought about that, hundreds of times in my life, because there's a guy who was like living it. And he's telling, like, he's in the future and he's like, "Hey, trust me on this. You won't be as motivated to do this when you get to my age." And I just look at it and I go, how can I stay? Like, how can you like push that away or keep that at bay for a while?
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that, other than continuing to walk that careful line between chasing it now, but also not doing the opposite of that, which is the 10 years from now or 15 years from now, we say, "Oh man, we did a lot of epic hunts, but I missed my kids this thing and I missed my kids that thing, and I didn't get to do this stuff with my son or my daughters or whatever." It's like, how do you balance that drive to do it all with knowing that we don't get our kids' childhoods back either, or our marriage back or whatever? Like, that's the constant balance, right?
Well, and you don't get your own time back either,
Yeah.
like you don't get your old health back. Like, I really think, and this is going to sound stupid, but I just, as I get older, I'm like, patience and discipline sure seem to serve me well for a lot of stuff. And so I look at that and I go, you don't have to lose your family over a deer, like, but you also don't have to try to get into a situation where it's so easy that the challenge is gone and you don't appreciate it anymore. Because when you see that, and I know people don't believe it, but when you see that, it's like a tangible thing that happens to people when they get a really, really good spot. It's very easy to just go, "Well, I don't have to work extra. Why would I?" But that when you put yourself in a position to be challenged and work extra, it usually makes you feel pretty good, and it keeps you kind of going, "Man, it didn't happen this year, but next year I'm going back to do that trip again," or keep buying those over the counter elk tags till they're gone, like, because they're going to be gone.
Yeah. I've got a buddy who I think he'd be okay with me saying this. A couple friends that now have a situation kind of like that, and they now call themselves box blind bastards.
Are these your Iowa buddies?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get a sweet spot and it gets comfortable, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's all some people want, which is great. Like, if you were happy with that, heck yeah, you got it made. But that might not be what.
Dude, you got to be real honest with yourself. I mean, because right, it could be your thing, and that could be exactly what you want out of your hunting, and that would be a perfect scenario. But you have to be really honest about it. Like, are you enjoying it? Like, are you enjoying going to the same view and opening the same window when you want to shoot a deer every time, or do you need something else? Like, it's so personal.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the great things about what we do, right? It's like, this can be whatever it is you want it to be. It's, and I suppose that's the case with a lot of different activities, I guess. Like, if you want to be a climber or a runner or whatever, you can make your own goals and your own experience. But that is particularly true with hunting, as long as you don't fall prey to the pressures of like what everybody else thinks.
Right.
And so I guess to that point, like, man, if you want to be a box blind guy or girl, man, more power to you. That's awesome. If that's the thing that gets you stoked and you are excited to go do it. And you should not be at all worried about what Tony or I think. But on the flip side, at the same time, like if that's not going to do it for you, but you're falling into the trap of like, oh man, this feels easy, and then you just keep doing it because it's the easy thing, well, then maybe you want to reconsider too. So it comes down to like knowing yourself, knowing what's going to keep you energized and excited about this, and then chasing that.
Well, and I think one of the things that we see with hunters a lot, like the general hunting population is terrified of change. Like you see this if there's a proposal to move a gun season or a bow season or something for some reason. I mean, you name it, we've seen it a million times. But you also have to recognize that you're going to change over the next 2 years and 5 years and 10 years. And so that goal of having that thing, maybe when you have kids and having, buying that 40 acres and putting those box blinds up and giving them that experience is like, closest thing to dying and going to heaven. But, when those kids hit teenage years and maybe they're not hunting with you or something, like you might be in a totally different place, or you might do it, you might do the public land thing and be like, that's only my thing, and burn yourself right to the ground for 5 seasons or 10 seasons in a row and go, man, I'm not looking forward to it anymore. I'm not scouting the way I want to. And like, if you're honest about that, maybe you're going the other way, and who knows where you'll end up. But if you're open to that stuff, it's important to just be honest about it.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of truth to that, in sampling and testing and seeing where that right place is for you. So, hard pivot here before we wrap up. There's one thing I wanted to ask you about last year, and something I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about here for a few minutes, which is one of our guilty pleasures, Tony, which is reading. We both do a lot of reading. And I never get to do podcasts where I get to talk about books. And you're the only person I could talk about books with. So do you have a favorite book or two, or recommended book or two, or something that stands out? It doesn't have to be a book. It could also be like a film, a documentary, a podcast series, anything like that. But I've got books. Do you have any recommendations coming out of 23?
I do. So even just what we talked about changing, and, I spent a lot of my life reading a lot of fiction and writing that way. And then, probably the last 5 or 7 years, I've mostly been reading nonfiction stuff, mostly. Like I wasn't drawn to just made up stories anymore, but I ended up reading, and I think you've read some of his stuff, Andy Weir's books. He wrote The Martian, Artemis, Hail Mary. Have you read those?
I've read part of The Martian, so I haven't finished Martian, and I own Project Hail Mary, and it's like on my to read list this year, but I haven't got to it yet. But I've read like the first chapter, and I'm like, I got to read this. So I was intrigued when you brought that up. That
was probably one of my favorite books of last year. And really? I'll tell you what, if I read the synopsis of it, I probably wouldn't have read it. Like I kept getting into it. He has a weird style, because it's very almost informal writing. Like there's a lot of like, and this is going to make me sound like a prick, but if I see something and it has a lot of exclamation points, I'm like, I don't want to read this probably. Just whatever. But that book, I kept reading it and getting into it. And I'm like, I was just like so surprised at how much I just enjoyed, being entertained by it. And it gets you to think about a lot of stuff, because he's real science-based. Mm-hmm. But it was a good lesson for me, because I was kind of like, I'm not, Cormac McCarthy died. I'm kind of done reading fiction, right? For the most part. And then I read that, and I was like, I just enjoyed it so much. And I liked all of his books. I read them all last year, but that one actually kind of just like, partially because I was like, there's no way this is going to do it for me. So that one, and I ended up going through, I'm reading a lot of space books. Which would not surprise you. And no surprise. I've been reading a lot of Carl Sagan stuff. And man, Cosmos, it was just, I don't know. I didn't read it for whatever reason. And then I read it last year, and I was like, it's just so interesting. Like anybody who can take the concepts of astrophysics and all of the math involved and all of the ways in which we know what's happening and explain it to somebody like me. Like you heard me try to do math when you were asking me about how many miles I run at the beginning of the episode, and I was off by like 1,200 miles. Anybody who can take those concepts, because all of that stuff is math, and just make it so digestible and interesting. He was,
And he wrote that back in like the 80s or 90s, right?
yes, and
So like this, it holds up. Like
oh
it's
my god!
still, it's
In fact,
interesting 40 years later.
it's probably it does. It's wild to hear some of his predictions and know what we've kind of proven to be true since then. But also, he wasn't just like obsessed with space, right? Like it was all about like our place in the universe and how we treat each other. And his way of looking at things was so fascinating as far as like what does society need? Like where are we going, but what do we actually need? And that I think that was why he was so popular. And I think that's why it holds true to this day.
See, I've got a similar fascination with those kinds of questions, but not with space. I'm interested in right now just like the impacts of AI and where that's going right now. That seems like we are on the precipice of this massive shift in so many different things. So that's been an area of like curiosity for me this year. I've read a bunch. I've got a book on that called The Coming Wave that I can't recommend yet because I'm just working through it still, but very interesting to this point. It's written by one of the founders of DeepMind, which is one of the AI companies that Google bought, 7-8 years ago or whatever. So they're the ones behind Google's big AI push. So interesting stuff.
Have you had a chance to talk to Steve Rinella about AI yet?
I have not. Did you guys get into that in Oklahoma?
We had an interesting conversation about it in typical Rinella fashion. He's like, it's not going to be anything.
Not a thing.
Yeah, it's not gonna ruin society. It's not going to enslave humans. It's just this total dismissive.
Well, I'll be sure to bring it up when I see him next and see where his head's at on that one.
So what was your favorite then? Because you just started that one. So if you looked at last year, what was the one where you were like, oh my God, I can't recommend this enough?
Probably it would be 2 books. The 2 books that the trick is like, one of them I think could be for anyone who listens to this podcast. One of them you'd have to be like very committed to learning about this kind of stuff. So the easy recommendation, and folks in our world have seen this recommended a bunch, but Wild New World by Dan Flores.
Oh, yeah.
Have you read that one?
I haven't read that one, but I've read his other books.
Okay, yeah. So, he's great. He's one of Steve's longtime friends. He's been on Steve's podcast. So his latest book takes a look at the history of wildlife and people in North America since people came to North America. So it basically starts like Pleistocene type animals, everything that happened there, the near, well, I think it's fair to say a catastrophic extinction event that occurred in North America relatively soon after folks showed up here. And then it follows from that all the way through, Europeans showing up and everything that happened there. And then kind of wraps up almost to where we are now. Just kind of following that constant push and pull and tension and dependency, but also destructive relationship we have with wildlife here. So really interesting. And I think super relevant to anyone who hunts or fishes. Kind of coming to terms with that. It's sometimes a very ugly history, but it's other times inspiring history. So that's a great book. Can't recommend that one enough.
Yeah, he's pretty good.
Yeah, very good. Second recommendation is one that I pushed on you years ago. We've talked about it since, and then I pushed it on you, and I had actually not finished it when I had pushed on you, and then I finally finished it this year, which is The Song of the Dodo by David Quammen. And so, as you know, since you read it, but I'll mention, I think I even talked about this once earlier back in 23. I brought it up, but I'm going to talk about it again because I just thought it was such a profoundly interesting book and well-written book. It basically looks at kind of how species, like it examines evolution and extinction. If I had to simplify it, it really dives into how species evolve and how species go extinct. And it uses the example of islands and the study of islands, called island biogeography, is basically this field of study. And what's interesting about this is that you can see evolution and extinction happen much more quickly and much more clearly on islands because of the fact that these are isolated populations. And so it uses all these different examples, and David travels around the world exploring these kinds of things, meeting with people, learning about this kind of stuff. And he goes all the way up into the history of like how we kind of figured this out in the first place. So it talks about Darwin and Wallace and the people who kind of figured out the theory of evolution. And then it goes all the way through relatively currently how we've also been trying to figure out like why are species going extinct and how is this happening? And what are the different forces that, not like the high level forces, like not habitat destruction, but like what happens to the genetics of a population, or what happens when you isolate a population. I don't know, nerdy, geeky, in the weeds kind of stuff, but he does it in a way that's pretty darn compelling. And what's really, I think, what makes this particularly relevant is this whole idea of like studying extinctions on islands. It does not just apply to like physical islands like Maui or something. We are also creating islands all over the world on the mainland because we are continuing to create these isolated pockets of wildlife habitat surrounded by people and development. So like Central Park is an island. Yellowstone is an island. The piece of woods behind my house is to a degree an island surrounded by agriculture all around it. So we're creating all these pseudo islands, and those island effects that have real ramifications on wildlife populations, we're creating those kinds of things all over the world, and species are disappearing because of it. So if you care at all about wildlife and having critters around and understanding why we have fewer critters, on average, 70% fewer animals. On average, species across the country have gone down 70%, not country, world, since 1970. So like there's this biodiversity crisis, and this is something I'm spending a lot of time diving deep into. This is one of the best books on it, and can't recommend it enough, but it is big and it requires like a commitment to like dive into it. But I think it's worth the time.
Yeah, that book is really good. It's just a real heavy lift.
Yeah, like there's a lot to unpack. I did this thing where I don't know if you've ever done this, but I have got the physical book and the audiobook, and I bounce back and forth between the two. You ever done that?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, it's been like, I don't know, for like books that take a while to get through, it's been a good way to like make time with them. Go for a long drive, cover a bunch of ground with it, and then like you're deep into it because you listen to it, but it's easier to listen, and then you can pick it up here and there nights in the week, and then jump in and do a long drive over the weekend or something, cover some ground. I don't know. It's been something I've started to do more often. It seems a little silly to pay extra money for a second copy of the same book, but I'm a fan of books, so I guess I feel like it's a donation that I'm okay making to the author.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, but with that said, we've got to wrap this one up because I've got to run off through a snowstorm and pick up my son, and I can't be late for that. Nope. So thanks, man, for talking books with me, for talking goals. It's going to be a good year. I'm excited about it.
Me too, buddy. Me too.
All right. Well, appreciate everyone tuning in for a bit of a random show here today. But as we start every new year, I kind of feel like it's nice to just kind of ease into the year, have some fun, talk about what we're thinking about and where things are headed, and kind of get ourselves rejuvenated for this next push. So with that said, appreciate you being here. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.